Thank you, Professor Ananiva, for the introduction. My name is Tom Walker, and I'm the Secretary of the Edinburgh Russia Conversations. I would like to go a bit further with it to explain the history of our organisation. The original group was founded by Professor John Ericsson of Edinburgh University. Professor Ericsson was a leading authority of World War II Soviet military history. And as an academic, he was respected by both Soviet officials and Western officials. And he sought to create a channel of communication during the coldest times of the Cold War. Delegations were sent for meetings in both Edinburgh and Moscow between 1981 and 1988. The participants were meeting in a personal capacity, and academic openness was encouraged, and a simple communique was produced after each meeting. Importantly, the meetings allowed the improvement of the understanding of one another. And that was used to foster a spirit of deeper sympathy and encouraged further discussion. Like Professor Ananiva said, we reconstituted the series of meetings, beginning with our initial communications in 2018. Today, there is more than a chill in the air between the UK and Russia. Accusations have been thrown around, tensions are building. The geopolitical situation is shifting rapidly, and this only amplifies the damage that can be done with miscommunication and poor understanding of one another. As there has been a breakdown in the relationships at governmental levels, we feel that this will provide an alternative avenue for communication of those in the surrounding circles. For our meetings today, we have Professor Farrell, Emeritus Professor of Languages at the University of Strathclyde. We also have Professor Bellamy. And Professor Bellamy, I would like to point out that he has a personal connection to Professor Ericsson and had the opportunity to study in his department and under his supervision at Edinburgh University, and participated in some of the original meetings of the Edinburgh Conversations. We also have Jim Sillars, a former Member of Parliament and former Deputy Leader of the Scottish National Party, who are the primary party in the Scottish Parliament at this moment in time, and Michael Fry, who is a prominent Scottish journalist and an author. So we were kindly welcomed when we came over to Moscow in 2018. And I feel that the initial meetings were very convivial. And I think that I'm only right to say, in the words of our president, Joseph Farrell, that for these meetings, we would like to meet with a feeling of candor and mutual respect. So thank you once again to everyone at the Gorchakov Fund for arranging our get-together today. And I would like to pass the speakership back to Elena for the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Tom. Well, do I really need to settle the sequence of speakers? Probably we'll start with Алексей Громыко. Начнем, наверное, с Алексея Анатольевича Громыко, предоставим ему слово. И затем, наверное, все-таки мы пойдем по этим вопросам, чтобы придерживаться некой последовательности. Прошу вас, Алексей Анатольевич.
Thank you very much, Yelena. I'm very glad and excited to participate once again in the project which Tom, his colleagues, and the Gorchakov Foundation has succeeded in moving forward. I keep very warm memories about our visit to Scotland, to Edinburgh, a couple of years ago. We spent truly very exciting time in the capital of Scotland, not just speaking to each other as professionals and experts, but as colleagues and permit me to say as friends for whom the political domain is not the only domain in life. And no matter how difficult this or that aspect of the relationship between Russia and the United Kingdom is, we know very well that life is multifaceted, and that as specialists in international relations, in linguistics, in history, in culture, our countries and Russia, and particularly Scotland, can offer each other a huge well, amount of information, historic lessons, deliberations, ideas, etc., etc. That has been a case throughout many centuries. So why the 21st century should be different from the previous ones? Of course, our thanks go to the Gorchakov Foundation on the Russian side, the foundation which has given its helping hand to organize our present meeting. And also, I would like to note that the full membership, it seems to me that the full membership of the Center for British Studies at the Institute of Europe is present now, is present here. Yelena and
Exactly, the full member.
Yelena, Kira, Godovanyuk, Oleg Akhoshin. So I'm very glad that we have managed to allure to involve all our specialists at the institute in this project. Well, just to share with you that my first acquaintance with Scotland took place in 1992. In 92, I was a Michaelmas visiting student at Durham University, and from Durham I traveled to Scotland, visiting Edinburgh for the first time in my life. And since then, the United Kingdom and Scotland became something what, apart from Russia, is the second place in the world where my professional interests rest, but not just professional, but dozens and hundreds of links and bonds with different people, with politicians and diplomats and experts, professors, students, so on and so forth. Just to mention that in the beginning of December, the Institute of Europe of the Russian Academy and the Institute of the US and Canadian Studies at the Russian Academy together with a numerous group of top-placed specialists in conventional arms control, published a document which is called the Recommendations of Dialogue on NATO-Russia Military Risk Reduction in Europe. And by now we have not less than 170 signatories. And for example, two of these more than 160 signatories are former Secretary General of NATO, including one Brit, or to be more precise, one Scot, if I'm correct, and this is Robertson. And there are quite a few people from the United Kingdom who worked with us on that document, and much more people put their signatures to support this document. Well, interestingly, that just yesterday, it happened so by coincidence that yesterday, when I was traveling to my dacha from Moscow, I was reading the latest issue of the journal Международная жизнь, International Affairs. This is the journal which is published by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Russia. And one of the pieces there is dedicated to the visit of Clementine Churchill to the Soviet Union in 1945, in March 1945. And probably all of you know quite well, and probably much better than I, that she spent several weeks in the Soviet Union, visiting many cities, and upon her return to the United Kingdom, she even published a small book, My Visit to Russia. Now back to the points highlighted by Yelena. London and Moscow, historic opponents or allies? This is a question which probably we ask each other each time when we meet, for years and for decades, and maybe now for centuries. And my answer would be very simple, that our countries are both. They are historic opponents, and at the same time, depending on the historic circumstances, we are allies or partners. And this is something what we cannot separate one from each other. When our countries were the centers of great empires, we know that they were intertwined very densely, but when geopolitically they thought that the interests of London and St. Petersburg were clashing, we were opponents, and even we fought wars. But at the same time, I would like to underline that the boots of the Russian soldiers have never been on the British soil, but the British soldiers took part, of course, in the Crimea War, in the events in the 1918, 1920. So the background of our historic ties is very complex. and the period which we are going through these days, these months, and these years is something what our countries experienced not once in the history, but if to judge from history, and I'm a historian, we can draw a certain conclusion, the interim conclusion, that sooner or later this period is going to end. Just because in history we did not have a single period of rivalry, which would not ended in a period of more or less good relationship. So the second question is Brexit and the pandemic. Who wins the competition? Well, in March or April this year, I was quite optimistic and full of hopes and expectations that the circumstances of the pandemic would lead to a certain, cooling of tensions, to certain empathy, probably to certain progress in areas which are not directly are in the grips of politics. But unfortunately, it didn't work out. The pandemic, from my point of view, made most things worse, not better. Especially it is reflected in the relationship, how it has been developing in the course of 2020, the relationship between the United States and China. Also, with respect to Russia, we had several stories when Russia was helping other countries with the medical equipment, with masks, with specialists. But for example, when quite a lot of load and cargo was delivered to Italy, then instantly there was quite a big or even a huge campaign in mass media, and not just in Italy. The goal of which was to portray this help as a new channel, of exporting spies from Russia to Italy as something what Moscow designed to separate NATO member countries, to divide the West, etc., etc. Of course, for most people in Russia, that was quite a ridiculous and laughable affair. But we know that that was not just something to be amused, but that was a reflection of a very tense geopolitical situation, and from my point of view, that was one of the ramifications of the decision of the United States 3 years ago, when under Trump a new national security strategy was adopted to proclaim that the world entered a new period of geopolitical rivalry among major powers or great powers. From my personal point of view, we are not going through a new period of major powers rivalry. We are going through a very difficult period of polycentricity taking shape, of major countries which have used to be the leaders, who have used to be on the top of the world, trying somehow to to reject the the facts and not to let other countries, including China, to become a real stakeholder, influential and respected. So from my point of view, nobody is going to win this competition. All sides are going to lose. And the real question is who is going to lose less. For example, China obviously is going to lose much less because of the pandemic than most of her rivals, including the United States, including India, Japan, etc., etc. As to Russia, Russia is losing less than pessimists expected. Well, it seems that the recession in Russia this year, the annual recession, the drop in the GDP will be 5.5%, which is less than most scenarios. Of course, this is a very big problem. Specialists in Russian affairs know quite well that in January this year, Putin and the Russian government launched, redress, a very quite a radical change in the governmental structure, in the structure of budget expenditures. Huge amounts of money were allocated to support the social sector in Russia, but most of this money by now have been spent, of course, on fighting the pandemic and its consequences. So it is a very sad and regretful observation that at the end of 2020 we should acknowledge that the political tensions between Russia and the West, Russia and the United Kingdom have heightened, not have become less visible and tangible. And probably the last point which I would like to cover, what to expect from new administration in Washington. One more small piece of advertising. Just several days ago, the Institute of Europe and the Royal Institute of International Relations of Belgium, Egmont, published a collection of articles on the consequences of the victory of Joseph Biden. And there are pieces written by me, by Andrei Kortunov, who is probably well-known figure for all of you, and several Western specialists and one specialist from China. So if you visit the website of Egmont or the website of the Institute of Europe, then the collection is there. But in a nutshell, I do not think that there are many serious specialists who would try to prove or to argue that the foreign policy of the United States is going to experience a profound change or shift under Joseph Biden. Of course, we are going to observe a lot of corrections and changes, for example, with respect to the Paris Climate Accord, or with respect to the Iran nuclear deal. We expect that under Biden, Russia and the United States will extend the New START agreement, what in Russia we call SNV3, and on better terms than it might have happened if the deal had been struck with Trump. Then we hope very much that the Open Skies Treaty will survive. We know that today 33 countries, after the United States left the Open Skies Treaty on the 22nd of November, all other 33 participants of this treaty have confirmed their membership. But what was going on under Trump was that Washington was pressing his European allies to keep sharing with Washington the information which is gathered during the reconnaissance flights. According to the Open Skies Treaty over Russia, over Belarus and other countries which are military allies of Russia. And secondly, Washington was going not to permit to make these flights over military bases of the United States in Europe. So now we hope that under Biden, these two points will not be imposed on the European allies of the United States, and the Open Skies Treaty will continue to function between or among those 33 states in full accordance with the letter and with the spirit of the treaty. I think that in the relationship between Russia and the United States, and most probably between Russia and the United Kingdom, we are not going to experience any significant improvement in the following years. More sanctions are going to be imposed on Russia, on China, on Belarus, on some other countries, on Turkey. The United Kingdom had Trump as an ally. I mean the Eurosceptic part of the United Kingdom. Boris Johnson was supported quite openly by Trump. And as we remember, Trump hailed and applauded Brexit. unlike the majority of the population in Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland.
Terribly sorry. Time.
Yes, just one minute. It seems to me that due to the fact that the Conservative government is going to stay at the helm of power for several years, this idea, the so-called idea of global Britain, still will be the focal point of the British foreign policy. The United Kingdom will try still to base its relationship with Washington on the doctrine of special relationship, although by now it is much more, certain form, not the molding form. The content of this doctrine is much far away from what it was in the 50s, 60s, or even 80s. So I do not expect any significant positive shifts, but I would say that in the domain of education, science, cultural exchanges, and expert collaboration on arms control, on different aspects of security, we have quite a big legroom. And once again to recall that the recommendations which we published this month with the support of quite a significant number of British specialists is one of the examples that even in the most difficult spheres of our relations, we can do a lot. And there are a lot of people who are not afraid to raise their voice in saying that, okay, geopolitical confrontation is one thing, but why we should equalize it or make it equal, with a new Cold War, which from my point of view is a crazy doctrine. Thank you, and sorry for probably taking more time than you expected me to take.
Thank you, Academician Gromyka. Well, I would like to add that there were concrete steps in the cooperation between UK and Russia, notwithstanding bad political relations. Well, on security during the World Cup in Moscow, and well, the recent example of AstraZeneca and Russian firms cooperating in producing the vaccine against COVID-19. So, so to say, piecemeal steps are nevertheless are taken. Well, our next speaker probably will be, if they agree, I would like to give the floor to a British speaker, and I would like to give the floor to Christopher Bellamy. Is he there? Christopher?
I think that we may have lost Professor Bellamy.
Okay, then well, on my screen, close to you is Professor Joseph Farrell. Can we hear your opinion on these issues and topics? Please, the microphone. Please, microphone. It should be on the left, at the bottom on the left on the screen. Please make it louder. I'm terribly sorry, I can't hear you. Please make the microphone louder. Please make. And then closer to the microphone, please. If you can, please move closer to the microphone. Oh, great.
Is this better? All right.
Yes,
In
great.
any case, I would suggest that you go to Jim Sellers first. I would like to come in, but I think it'd be better if Jim Sellers spoke for the Scottish contingent first. All right. I've lost it now.
Лена, включи звук. Теперь ты.
Mr. Sellers, glad to hear you. Glad to hear you. The floor is yours, Mr. Sellers.
Oh, well, I was going to say that Chris has now come back. If you want to go to Chris, I'd be quite happy to stand back.
So, Christopher Bellamy, Dr. Christopher Bellamy is again with us, so maybe he'll take the floor.
Yep.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Well, first of all, I will say that I agree with everything that Alexei said. I'll take all 5 questions, if I may, together. Is that all right? Can you hear me?
Okay, but Professor, I would like to remind you of the timetable so we can have some time left for discussion.
All right,
so
I'll be quite brief because, as I say, I agree with virtually all of what Alexei said. On the first question, London and Moscow, historic opponents, the Allies, what is our status? Alexei mentioned, obviously, the Great Patriotic War, in which we were allies. Also, of course, we were allies against Napoleon. And we were allies in the First World War against Imperial Germany, and Imperial Russia was part of the war for 3 years, more than 3 years. And I recently did a chapter for a book on the Allied victory in the First World War, and it was widely considered when Russia left the war for good reasons in November 1917, that its leaving the war made the war go on another year, and that was the opinion of the British military attaché in Petrograd. And so we have been allies. We have also, of course, been opponents. And the area where we were most obviously opponents was in Asia, because after the Crimean War, Russia moved into Central Asia and posed a threat, as it was perceived by the British, to India. And much of our policy from the 1860s right up to 1907, when we secured an agreement, was designed to head off what was perceived, probably exaggeratedly, as the Russian threat to India, including the vast expansion of the Gurkha colonial troops, who were the only British colonial troops who were considered able to fight the Russians. So, you know, there is a huge history of mutual respect there. And as I say, we have been opponents and we have been allies. The Cold War led to effectively a demonization of the Soviet Union. And that has, I regret to say, I believe, has continued in the mindset of Western military and also the British military. And I have anecdotal evidence to show that Russia is regarded now as not a shooting war enemy, but as a virtual enemy. And I'm sorry to say that that seems to be the case. Conversations like this and the work of people who understand Russia and have been to Russia, oddly enough, most of the people who know Russia tend to be more sympathetic to Russia. It is, and that's a later question, but most of the, of course, most people in Britain now know nothing about Russia, have never been there, and therefore will buy any statement by the British government to the effect that Russia is not a friend. My own personal view is that we are actually the most natural of allies. We are on opposite ends of the European continent. We have rotten weather. we like many of the same things. And as I say, many of my colleagues with whom I worked at the independent newspaper, people like Mary Dejevsky, for example, have always give Russia the benefit of the doubt. I would just mention, as a scholar, there is a book out. Keir Giles works at Chatham House, the Royal Institute of International Affairs. I can send you the references if you want. Moscow Rules: What Drives Russia to Confront the West? And Keir Giles is one of our best analysts. He worked with the Americans on this, the Brookings Institute and Chatham House. And I would recommend it to anybody who wants to understand why Russia is worried about us. And very quickly and simply, I would say that, first of all, when the Cold War ended, Germany was reunified. Russia received assurances from many people, particularly in NATO, that NATO would not expand. And it promptly did. And NATO moved from 1,400 kilometers from St. Petersburg to 140. And so, as a student of Russian history, I understand why the Russians find this upsetting. Okay, second question. Hi, Nina. Second question, Brexit and the pandemic. Who wins this competition? Did the UK exit from the EU help deal with the coronavirus or escalate the situation? Well, Brexit certainly did not help. In my view, it escalated the problems. Most notably, of course, immediately, potentially, the supply of medicines. My view also is that over the past few weeks, the government has deliberately exaggerated the pandemic to divert attention from its efforts to negotiate a post-Brexit deal, which it seems now to have delivered a deal which whereas I voted against Brexit, of course, but it's delivered a deal which denies many of the things that the people who voted to Brexit voted for. And I think there is evidence, anecdotal again, that many people who voted for Brexit are now thinking twice about it. But we are where we are. That's a dreadful British management phrase. We are where we are leaving, we have got a deal, and we have to make the most of it. Third question, the new US administration. Who Moscow and London see the prospects for dealing with? Well, I think there's very little doubt, other than perhaps with our Prime Minister, that Joe Biden will be, and Kamala Harris and their Secretary of State will be easier to deal with than Donald Trump was. In addition to whom we and Moscow, Russia, should deal with, I think that there is scope for utilizing forums like this one to liaise more closely with the American foreign policy, military experts, because again, in Giles' book, he dedicates it to, and I quote, to all those career US government officials who are working hard to build and deliver a sensible policy on Russia, while hoping that President Trump doesn't notice. Well, that's a pretty perceptive comment by Keir, as I say, and hopefully after the 20th of January, we will have more scope for negotiation, particularly in the face of the big problems that face us, which are obviously global pandemics and climate change, and also Islamist terrorism, against which both we and Russia have bitter experience, and both of which we wish to mitigate. Fourth question, London and Edinburgh, together or apart, whether the Union Jack will remain united, position of Scotland and Russia's view. Well, I can give you the view as an Englishman who worked in Scotland for many years with John Ericsson and others. I think that for Scottish independence is probably inevitable, particularly in the wake of Brexit. If you remember, when Scotland voted to remain part of the United Kingdom, one of the arguments that was put forward was that if Scotland left the United Kingdom, it would then have to go to the back of the queue to rejoin the European Union. And the Scots, being sensible, canny people, thought that was a bad idea, so they voted to stay part of the UK. Then, of course, the UK, due to a majority in England, then voted to leave the EU. So I think that will inevitably put a further impetus behind the move for Scottish independence. Then if Scotland were then to reapply to join the EU, I would hope that the EU would regard that sympathetically, but it would mean a border along the Cheviot Hills between England and Scotland, just north of Hadrian's Wall. So I think in the longer term, personally, I believe that Scottish independence is on the cards. I don't say it will happen, but it might do. On the bringing in the COVID example, it's interesting that the four nations of the United Kingdom, England, by far the biggest in terms of population, Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland, all have devolved authority to take their own measures on COVID-19. And it's quite interesting to see how although they do actually, the health ministers of every one of the four nations of the UK, they meet every week, and their policies are pretty much in line now. But that's a measure of how far devolution has influenced what is actually a critical measure of national security, i.e. how you deal with COVID. And we are doing that on a four-nation basis. And I've no doubt that Joe might want to say some more about this. Anyway. Myths about Russian people in the UK and misconceptions about the British in Russia. I think it's fair to say that every Brit, or many Brits who've been to Russia write a book about it. When you've been there, you find it unbelievably fascinating, unbelievably diverse, and you want to write a book about it. And funnily enough, I'm just reading a book by Peter Fleming, who was the brother of Ian Fleming, who wrote James Bond, who went to China in 1933, and he went through the Soviet Union. And his comments about the Soviet Union I'm going to use lots of them as quotations in whatever I write next. However, it has to be said that most people in the United Kingdom, particularly now, have no knowledge of Russia. They haven't been there. It's not the place to go, as in some senses it was in the 1960s. So if you haven't been there and you haven't studied the country and the history and so on, you will tend to believe whatever the British government tells you. However, I and many of my colleagues who have studied Russia and have been there are much more, I hope, understanding of Russia and its priorities and so on. Going back to Prince Gorchakov, after whom your institute is named, he was famously asked in the 1850s, just after the Crimean War, whether Russia was an Asiatic power or a European power. And he said, it is a Russian power. And Britain, similarly, was an Asiatic power with our empire in India. We had interests which we managed in Europe, but it was a British power. It was a global power. I believe that the Brexiteers' philosophy is that they wanted to restore Britain to being a global British power. The thing is, they had a very small infrastructure on which to base that. And so these comments are all personal. I don't think we should have left the European Union, but we have. And I look forward to the future with interest, as the Chinese say, as Chinese curse, may you live in interesting times. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Bellamy, for your very profound and interesting report. And I would like to pass the floor to Ivan Popov, professor of Moscow State Institute of International Relations.
Thank you, Yelena.
And I would like to remind you of our timetable. Terribly sorry.
No problem. I will try to be good. First of all, I congratulate my colleagues with brilliant ideas expressed in these two speeches that we've heard with great interest. Not being specialist in British questions, nor in history or in politics, I have much more European point of view on what is happening in the relationship between the United Kingdom and Russian Federation. So I will try to answer briefly all the questions that are placed here. First of all, historically, London and Moscow have been always partners, but opponents as well. And I think that even with Brexit, there is no big occasion to have good relationship and collaboration between our two countries, not because Russian Federation is not interested in it, but my opinion is that the political class of the United Kingdom is not interested in good relationship with the Russian Federation. So we can offer good cooperation, but we can't stay with our hand raised while the opponent doesn't see or ignore. The second question, Brexit or pandemic? Well, of course, pandemic is a very important global problem. Brexit is much more local problem. Nevertheless, I would say that politically Brexit is much more important for the relationship in Europe because pandemic will go on, will go away, but Brexit will stay. So from this point of view, Brexit is very important for us, for all of us, for Eastern Europe, for Western Europe, for British Ireland, and for the United States, for the whole northern half of our planet. Biden or Trump? Well, I am absolutely sure that between two evils, we should select less one. Trump is much bigger evil for the normal relationship of the Russian Federation with the Western countries than Biden. Biden is very bad for us. Of course, he is very keen enemy of the Russian Federation. But he at least is quite realistic in understanding that the United States can't go away from the scheme erected during the Cold War period and afterwards, which which gives the world some idea of safety. Trump is so nationalistic that he doesn't want to think about global things, while Biden will think about it. We will have much more difficulties with him throughout the world. But from the point of view of the world to be more safety, I think that Biden is much better for us, and for both, for Britain and for us. Although I don't believe that your prime minister will have a very good relationship with the Biden team and with those who are surrounding Mr. Biden. And that is another question, how we should estimate the influence of the leftist trends in Democratic Party on the future policy of the new administration. London, Edinburgh. Well, for me, being a sort of specialist in Spanish affairs, Scotland is of very big interest because I'm involved in analyzing the situation with Catalonia in Spain, and I see many things coinciding with the political processes that are happening in Scotland. In my opinion, British government wins in comparison with the Spanish one, dealing with the rebel part of the United Kingdom, because Spaniards are not so keen in dealing with the questions of United Nation. So from this point of view, I think that Edinburgh will stay with London in any case, although I may agree that I may be a little bit naive, but I'm sure that there is one factor that is equal both for Spain and for the United Kingdom, that the external forces will not permit any fall of United Nation. NATO will not permit it. And we should take into account that from my point of view, both the United Kingdom and Spain have some restrictions in their sovereign power and sovereign right to decide some internal political questions. And the unity of the country is among them. Myths about Russia in London, in England, or in the United Kingdom, better to say, and vice versa. Well, I think that I agree absolutely with Professor Bellamy that lack of knowledge is the basis for such myths, and I would say that the political class of the United Kingdom and of the Russian Federation as well are likely to use it, this lack of knowledge, in order to conserve such myths, negative myths. And I think that the academic society of both countries should make it's better to struggle against such lack of knowledge. If not, we will still have the younger generations absolutely ignoring the real facts. And the last one, the attitude in Russia to these corrections introduced in our constitution. Well, I must admit that it's a very internal question, but in any case, I would say that I found myself among vast majority of those who voted in favor of such changes in the constitution, although I do not agree with the form selected by our political class, how to present and how to make people vote for such changes. In any case, I think that the majority of the Russian people find out that our political class governing now is struggling for making our country more unified and more safety. And from this point of view, both in social, economic, political, and external questions, these introductions in the Constitution work for, not against, making our country more prepared for competition that is going to continue in the nearest future. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Popov. I would like to give a brief comment on what Professor Bellamy and Professor Popov said.
Zoom, darling.
Sorry? Sorry?
Elena, do you want me on now, Elena?
Sorry?
Do you want me to comment now?
Yes, Mr. Sellers, just one word from me, and then we go to you.
Thank you very much.
Well, this lack of knowledge and what is going on in the media has its roots in the policy of the UK government. Well, this summer, Boris Johnson at last gave his consent to publish the report of the parliamentary committee, which was called Parliamentary Committee on Defense and Intelligence, which was called Russia. Well, I understand perfectly well that the head of this committee was Dominic Grieve, a staunch Remainer. But what alarms me is not only what was given in this report, but who the authors were. It was, well, apart from government officials, there were William Browder, Anne Applebaum, then Edward Lucas. So not a single person from the diplomatic corps or a researcher. For instance, previous parliamentary reports were composed on the evidence of researchers from Chatham House, from other universities. I could mention Derek Aver or Andrew Monaghan, not a single person. So it was very anti-Russian right from the start, with no objective knowledge. We are expecting in January the integrated report on defense and security, of the governmental report, and I have little hope that anything positive will be in this report. So, Mr. Sellers, over to you.
Fine. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Fine. Well, I think meetings like this are always in danger of us telling each other what we would like to hear about each other. And I think it's important that we be frank with each other. I mean, for example, I am a Brexiteer, and I have very good reasons for voting Brexit. from a Scottish point of view, as well as a United Kingdom point of view. And I don't agree with Chris Bellamy that the United Kingdom and Russia are natural allies. If I look at it from a United Kingdom citizen's point of view, I see no UK national interest whatsoever in Russia and in the former Soviet territories. Where's our national interest from the UK in the Ukraine or the Crimea? Now, there were international national interests in our history when the United Kingdom was an imperial power and was opposed imperialist Russia in several spheres. That's all gone. At the present time, in the 21st century, we have no natural interest in relation to Russia, and we are not natural allies. And we should start from that point of view, because that's just nice talk. It is not the reality. If we're going to formulate foreign policy and international trade relations, it should be done on the basis of that reality. Now, where the United Kingdom is linked in to questions of Russia is in its membership of NATO. And NATO has expanded, and that brings us very near the borders of Russia. It doesn't make us natural allies, and I perfectly understand from the Russian point of view, that makes us potential adversaries. That's the reality as I see it at the present time. And I agree with Professor Gorchakov when he said he got the clear impression that the political class in the United Kingdom really has no interest in improving relations with Russia. And certainly, I'm not a scholar, but I'm a politician. And I look at various people in our political class and talk to them. They have absolutely no interest in improving relations. They don't see anything in it for them, and anyone popping their head above the parapet and saying, oh, by the way, I think we should actually understand Russia on the Crimea and Russia on the Donbass. Russia for them is toxic. That is the reality. And it is not helped, that toxicity is not helped by some of the performances of the Russian government, which from a British point of view, even the man and woman in the street point of view, is actually incomprehensible. Why lie about the Salisbury poisonings? Nobody in the United Kingdom believes that we were visited out of the blue by two just ordinary Russian people coming to have a look at the Salisbury Cathedral. And yet, that was the message punted out from officials in the Kremlin, and the performance of your ambassador at that time on British television was extremely damaging to the understanding of the Russian people and the developments that are taking place in Russia at the present time. One of the points of incomprehension, for example, very recently, in relation to the changes in the Russian constitution, was President Putin's address to the Duma, when he justified the change, some very substantial ones, on the basis, according to the Reuters report that I've read, that these were necessary because you still had not recovered from the trauma of the Yeltsin 1990-91 years, and were still lacking the essential stability and quote unquote maturity. Now, it's almost incomprehensible to someone like me or the man in the street or my neighbours upstairs that after 30 years how can you accept that the Russian president doesn't think they're mature enough to say 2 terms are plenty? So I think you've got to understand that there are flaws and faults in comprehension on both sides. And it's better if we address some of those faults and incomprehensions. But I now want to turn to 2 other subjects. One is the United States, a special relationship. There is no special relationship, and there hasn't been since 1945. Probably argue from D-Day in Normandy, there was no really that old special relationship that grew up in the early part of the war. It was related on a BBC radio program by a man who happened to be in the White House, in the Oval Office at the time. Someone asked John F. Kennedy about the special relationship. And Kennedy said, well, look, Britain's actually our lieutenant, but we've got to call them an ally in a special relationship. British foreign policy under any government in London will align itself with United States foreign policy. So if there's going to be ever an unfreezing or a thaw in relationships, the United States will actually have to take the lead and the United Kingdom will follow. It's not that the UK will lead and the United States will come along at the back of it. And there is a major problem in the next 4 years called Trump. If anyone thinks that Donald Trump is going to disappear, then they're living in a false world. He has already established a political action committee and has raised funds in order to remain in the position. And I've only heard one analyst in the United States point out a serious problem, and that's the 2022 midterm elections in the United States usually go against the administration. And I anticipate Trump campaigning from the 20th of January as the alternative legitimate president, campaigning to overturn the majority, the Democrat majority in the House, and overturn any Democrat majority in the Senate, which may be or may not be likely or unlikely on the 5th of January in Georgia. If he is instrumental in claiming the success of that midterm defeat for the Democrats, he has set himself up once again for the run in 2024. So Biden will always have Trump at the back of his head. And I believe that's a tragedy for the United States, but it's certainly in international relations is going to make it very difficult for Biden to take significant changes from the foreign policy that the Republicans and Trump pursued. Finally, I come to Scotland. We're living in a surreal world with a pandemic. And Nicola Sturgeon is a superb communicator. And the difference between her communicating skills and those of Boris Johnson have in fact helped Scottish independence. Johnson isn't liked anyway. He's the kind of upper class Englishman that Scots just basically don't like. He has got not only no traction in Scotland, but he's got a negative effect on the Union. What we're going to get is that after the pandemic, Brexit settles down, the number one issue for the Johnson government is to stop Scottish independence. I'm not sure whether they will manage it. I'm a member of the SNP and I'm for independence. But there is, in the London mind, and I study both sides of the argument, in the London mind, there is the view that all they need to do is give Scotland more union. If there's a project that they have funded, they'll put up the Union Jack to say, look at the benefits of the union. They don't understand historical and political forces at work at the present time. And I'll give you an example from a statement in today's Telegraph, where the reporter is recording what cabinet ministers have said to her yesterday. One cabinet minister said, it's all about personalities. Imagine if Boris Johnson and Nicola Sturgeon disappear all of a sudden. And it's Rishi Sunak, the Chancellor, and Angus Robertson as the two leaders of the UK and Scotland. That's a different political ballgame. Now that's balderdash, because it's not about personalities. It's about historic factors and economic factors. There is a problem for the independence movement, and it's contained in this book. There are genuine devolutionists in Scotland, and Professor Ben Thompson has brought all their opinions together on how to stop Scottish independence, save the Union by what's called home rule. Much, much more powers to Scotland, almost in a federal setting, with a division of sovereignty between them. And I think when the first idea of the Johnson government, more union and more Union Jacks, fails, as it inevitably will do, then we're likely to get home rule hunted by and promoted by London, because the Labour Party is in favour of it. Gordon Brown, the former Prime Minister, is one of its main advocates and is still widely respected in Scotland. So the independence movement, when the referendum does come, as it will come, may be faced with a two-question ballot: independence or more power to Scotland within the framework of the United Kingdom. Now, that second question is actually a very attractive one, because it means there'd be no border on the border. Scotland would remain in the single market of the United Kingdom. There would be no change in currency. One of the major difficulties the independence movement faced in 2014 was on
Terribly sorry, the video has stopped. Mr. Sillars, we can't hear you, and the picture is not moving. Could you check? So, Mr. Sillars, have you finished? Your microphone is out. Please, please have a look. Your microphone should be turned on.
Yes, I've turned it on. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yeah, I was just coming to the end anyway. That, you know, at the moment, with opinion polls showing 58% for independence, that could be a false factor in this surreal world we're living in. And also, The opinion polls have never asked the question, independence or home rule with more devolution. And that will be one of the key questions that are being asked. Well, I am still in favour of Scottish independence. Unlike many of my colleagues in the Scottish National Party, I don't think plain sailing to that particular objective. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Sellers. This is a very interesting topic for us here in Russia. And as Dr. Popov said, for Spain to compare. So we have one more speaker, Dr. Joseph Farrell. Over to you. We have 20 minutes left. I understand that in our presentation, we have already had a sort of discussion. So maybe some time will be left. Over to you, Dr. Farrell.
Okay, can you hear me?
Well, could you please put on the earphone? No, we can't hear you. Please put on the earphones.
No. I
That's
don't know
great.
if this makes
Yeah,
any
that's
difference.
great. That's great.
You can hear me. Okay. I shall be very brief. I had some other comments which to some extent follow from Professor Bellany, to some extent from Jim Sellers. First of all, thank you very much to the Gorchakov for arranging this. One very brief point, just to change the focus onto a question of culture. I heard Professor Bellany say that everybody who goes to Russia wants to write a book. I did come to Russia last year. I did not write a book about Russia, but I have been writing a book which is about dueling, il duello, le duel. And I've ended up with considerations about Pushkin and Lermontov in particular. And one of the things which did actually occur to me was the extent to which Russia at that period, and I'm talking about Russian culture, not Russian politics, was integrated with romanticism in the whole of Europe, and above all with the figure of Lord Byron. Let's bear in mind, and someone did put up a message earlier on asking if we could talk about cultural exchanges. Let's bear in mind it's one of my regrets that there is no kind of Russian Cultural Institute in Edinburgh. France, Italy, Spain, even Denmark have got the cultural institutes. It would help if we were able to build on past collaboration, which in this field, unlike in politics, has been very strong indeed. I would also like to pick up one of my other interests is Catalonia. I can speak Catalan. Can I say to the speaker, I'm sorry, I missed his name, who was talking about Catalonia, let's bear in mind that in addition to Brexit and so on, there are other movements inside Europe, that the complicated history of Europe, which has left us with what we can call stateless nations or linguistic and cultural communities, of which Catalonia and Scotland are two, but there are many others, that there are pressures there which are actually pushing Europe in a slightly different direction. And I'm not, with all respect, convinced that once the Scottish question comes up, that the rest of Europe will take the same attitude that is taken towards Madrid. I deplore the way that Brussels and the European Union has been critical of Poland and of Hungary and have totally ignored what Madrid is doing to Catalans. It is an important deficiency, incomprehensible to me. But I would like to suggest that in addition to discussion of pandemics and Brexit, that we bear in mind various other things. I should also say that unlike my friend Jim Sellers, I was very much pro-EU. I certainly voted to remain. I am sorry for the fact that Britain in general has come out. I would even go as far as to suggest that under this present government that we have in Westminster, not in Edinburgh, in Westminster, the United Kingdom has almost stepped out of history. It's going on a way which is motivated. I know there are financial and economic considerations, by some sort of nostalgic view, this phrase, global Britain, will turn out to be one of the great myths of recent times. It has never been explained to us how it will actually be realized, what it will actually do with other forces that have been discussing in the Pacific, the rise to power of India, of China, most obviously. And I was very interested in what Mr. Gromyko was saying earlier on about Russia's move towards China. Plainly, the Pacific is going to be the new force in world affairs. Britain, talking of a global future, the global Britain, I think, is deceiving itself by its own kind of language. And this is the last point, and I know this will be more controversial, and I'm agreeing very much with Jim Sellers in this. When we said that we wanted to have conversations, when we came to Moscow and to St. Petersburg, and we said we would have conversations, I said we would try and have these motivated by 2 points. That is to say, by candor, complete openness, but also by courtesy and by cordiality. And of course, we met great cordiality when we were there in Russia, enormous cordiality. And we were courteous and we were treated with enormous courtesy. But it was a pity that it was only when Jim Sellers was making his contribution that we did finally touch on some things which are separating us. Jim said that Russia's reputation was toxic, and that may be true. But the fact is that there are real issues. He mentioned one of them, the Salisbury poisoning, but also the poisoning of the other Russian statesman, Navalny. Now, it may be that there's some sort of explanation for it, but in both occasions, it seems beyond all belief that these people were actually poisoned and that the poisoning was carried out by Russian agencies. And I would expect some of our Russian friends to denounce that with the candor with which I and others will denounce the way the British government is going on. There are other matters. The Americans are especially concerned about hacking of various of their political processes. And although we've been talking about the distinction or the changes that may be between Trump and Joe Biden when it becomes, it does appear that inside the United States political system, these hackings took place in favor of Trump. Now, this is incomprehensible, and I'm prepared to believe and to agree with anyone who says the British Secret Service, that the American CIA have done exactly the same things. I'm sure they have, and if they haven't, then it's because of a lack of ability and not because of a lack of will. What I don't understand was this strange period under Trump, when Trump seemed to receive the backing of Russia, and when he did seem to be, in many ways, in thrall to Russia. And the other one I would say, as a point of difference between us, which we found incomprehensible, if we spoke about Catalonia in particular and the oppressiveness of the Madrid government towards the Catalans and the failure of the European Union to denounce what was being done by Spanish national government, then we have to talk just a little about Belarus. Now, I know that officially Belarus is now an independent country and not part of the Russian state, as Catalonia is part of the Spanish state, as Scotland is part of the United Kingdom. But it was hard for people to understand why, when there had been a democratic procedure, when this democratic procedure was evidently subverted by the president over there, why Russia remained silent, why Russia did not condemn the misuse of the political system in Belarus. So as I expected people in the West to condemn the behavior of Madrid towards Catalonia, I'm afraid I would equally have expected a certain candor of statement from the Russian government towards Belarus, towards the behavior of the government, first of all in behaving in the way they did in the election and also in towards the subsequent demonstrators. I could go on, but I've said enough. Maybe I've said too much, but we'll leave as much time as we can for the candid but cordial and courteous conversation, which I hope these meetings will be all about. And I do look forward to the days after the pandemic when it will be possible for us to go back to Russia and, of course, for Russian friends to come to Scotland. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Who would like to take the floor now in our brief discussion? So maybe some of those who were not identified as speakers, maybe some of our guests and other participants. Please, Peter Reid, thank you.
Thanks very much, and I'd also like to say thank you, of course, to everyone that spoke as well. It opened my eyes to a lot of issues and a lot of perspectives that I hadn't come across before. I've got a question or a couple of questions, particularly for Mr. Gromyko. The concern is statement on the US attitude to changing geopolitical forces just now, and the US characterization of world affairs as a rivalry. Mr. Gromyko, I think if I understood you correctly, then you'd portray it more as just a more natural change in power, where the previous top dogs were being replaced or balanced out by new forces. So I wonder the difference between this rebalancing and rivalry. Is this just a conceptual difference? Are the US looking at this wrongly at the same basic events, or is there an actual difference in terms of really what's happening on the ground, as it were, between a rivalry and just a rebalancing? Does one naturally come from the other? And then perhaps relatedly, how is it that Russians, particularly Russian young people, view themselves politically and culturally within this change? I mean, as Professor Bellamy said, do they just see themselves as a Russian power? Or do they see themselves as more closely aligned to Asia, as particularly from the cultural field or the cultural side? Are Russians starting to view themselves as more Northern European again?
Thank you for your questions, Peter. Well, whatever century we take, each century was full of competition and rivalry, but competition and rivalry are not synonyms. You may have a competition and a very tough competition, but it does not mean that you should be rivals. For example, in the 19th century, the concept of powers, there was a high competition among them, but they were not rivals. These powers managed to shape a certain mechanisms of coordination, of understanding, of controlled competition. Or, for example, the Soviet Union and the United States, they were both rivals and competitors, but since 1962, since the Cuban or Caribbean crisis, they managed to work out certain mechanisms which led to the system of strategic stability. They created a very strong architecture of arms control, So I would say that in the 70s, when, for example, in the 1975, the final act in Helsinki was signed, including, of course, by the Soviet Union and the United States, they were more competitors, but not rivals, which desire, was to politically and even maybe military to crush the other side. So in the 21st century, within the framework of multipolar world or polycentricity, which from my point of view is a much more precise and much more scientific, so to say, term, within the framework of polycentricity, it is quite natural that the competition is running high, not just between Russia and somebody else, but between the European Union and the United States, between the United States and China, between China and India, so on and so forth. But why we should think that any form of competition inevitably should lead to one more edition of a Cold War or to rivalry on the brink of a local war, or even on the brink of a new big war. This is something what is incomprehensible for me. For example, Trump. Why Trump was much more inclined to try to do deals with Russia than his predecessor or than Joseph Biden is going to be, because Trump was very pragmatic, and one of the pillars of the Trump's presidential campaign back in 2016 was to stop Russia and China closing their ranks. And geopolitically, he was much cleverer than his opponents in the Democratic Party. All serious geopolitical thinker in the 19th or in the 20th century, they were saying, different things, but almost all of them were saying one thing, which was similar. That for any Western power which wants, to be the number one in the world, the union between Russia and China, or between Germany and Russia, it depends on the period in history, should be prevented. So that's why Trump really tried, in the national interests of the United States, to stop Russia and China to become not just strategic partners, in the economic sphere or in something else, but in the military sphere. But the will of the Congress, of the liberal political class of the United States, was imposed on Trump. So really, the number of sanctions which under Trump was introduced against Russia was higher than the number of sanctions under Obama, for example. But it doesn't mean that Trump tried. So I think that Biden is going, unfortunately, to pursue the same fallacious strategy of of having both Russia and China as ostensibly main rivals of the United States. And I would agree as far as China is concerned. Really, China is going to be and already is the main competitor of the United States, not Russia. The Russian share of GDP is 3% in the global GDP, but the China's economy in purchasing power parity is already bigger than the American economy. And in nominal terms, it is going to surpass the United States in, well, in 1, 2, 3 years' time. So I think that the philosophy of rivalry is something what leads us to a dead end. But it seems to me that the liberal part of the American establishment and the liberal part, or to put it more precisely, the neoliberal part of the European political establishment, just, you know, following the same mistaken strategy of, well, fighting water mills or weather mills, and portraying both Russia and China as main sources of threat to the liberal and democratic West. That's why I strongly believe that it is a very mistaken principle of trying to construct the near future of international relations in terms of rivalry among major states or major powers, because both sides are going to lose, and China and later India, and, you know, and bad guys, international terrorists, etc., they are going to gain.
Thank you very much. I think we are drawing to a close of this session. I've written some 10 pages of notes because all the reports were very interesting and produce a lot of material for consideration. So I would like to thank all of you. I would like to thank the Gorchakov Fund for organizing this session. And I very much hope that we will meet in the future, and probably not only once a year, because we have many things to discuss, and the events in the world are just going at a bigger speed. So the world situation is changing rapidly, and we should keep an eye on it. And since we've met a year and a half ago, there are too many things to discuss. Sorry?
Elena, there are questions in chat. If it is possible to keep the keep the Zoom session open, and even if the interpreters cannot go on beyond 2 hours, those who wish to keep discussing certain
Yes.
issues.
Yes. Now I see.
Уважаемые коллеги, я очень прошу прощения, что перебиваю. У меня просто компьютер завис. Меня зовут Сандра Стылкович, я являюсь ведущим специалистом фонда Горчакова. Дарья попросила посодействовать, если вдруг понадобится. Если у наших экспертов есть времени на то, чтобы остаться с нами и продолжить дискуссию еще на 15-20 минут, было бы замечательно.
Ну, я думаю, можно вполне. I think that it is possible to stay another 15-20 minutes for everybody to ask questions and receive answers. So I see a question from Irina Typiakina. If it is possible, I would like to ask Scottish experts to tell a bit about current cultural exchange and cooperation between Russia and Scotland. What is the role of non-governmental organizations in the process? Thank you very much.
Sorry. Could you repeat the question, please?
Yes, I'll repeat the question. Oh. If it is possible, I would like to ask Scottish experts to tell a bit about current cultural exchange and cooperation between Russia and Scotland. What? Sorry.
Могу я вот немножко, ну, я стараюсь немножко поговорить на русском, если можно. Меня зовут...
And the second
Ой, sorry.
From David McHutchison. Yes, please, your question.
David, please, your question.
Ну, в принципе, меня тоже интересует этот вопрос. Я сам шотландец, поддерживаю позицию Тима Силерса, что Шотландия должна быть независимой от Великобритании и от Европейского Союза. Полная независимость. И иметь хорошие, свободные, ну, тихие отношения с своими соседями и также с Россией в том числе. Было бы отлично, если существовал, наверное, какой-то обмен, культурный обмен. Допустим, для нас в нашей семье нам очень повезло. Прадедушка служил где-то в Кавказе во время Первой мировой войны, писал об этом вот свой дневник. Дедушка служил в морском флоте во время Второй мировой войны и несколько раз посетил Мурманск. Мы с отцом тоже вот много раз посетил. Вот. Но я, по крайней мере, один раз посетил, 2 раза, извините, Россию. И вот я с этим согласен, что вот тот контакт, культурный контакт, посетить Россию, это очень поддерживает взаимное понимание. Конечно, ну, может быть, об этом Том Джозеф больше знает. Интересно было бы узнать, что в Шотландии в данный момент существует касательно образовательного обмена. Извините за ошибку.
I can give a point of view from the practical side of things. As the secretary for the Edinburgh Russia conversations, I've tried to reach out to various different organisations, whether they are academic or cultural, in Scotland, and unfortunately I always get a very poor response. Not a lot of institutions wish to carry out a lot of work in anything to do with Russia. So I've always been very disappointed. For example, in Edinburgh University, we have the Dashkova Centre, and we wish to engage them with our association to try to work together. And the response was very poor, and they made it clear that they wish to keep a distance. So unfortunately, the position at the moment is that there is not a lot of cultural exchange or cooperation. But I hope that when more sensible minds come to the front, then that could improve with time.
And as a private initiative, do you think there's scope for greater, maybe private educational exchanges or something of that nature?
Yes, I think that a lot of the blocking or problems are at a higher, more governmental level. When you talk to, for example, those that were involved with the charity to do with the Arctic convoys, then there's a lot of mutual respect and understanding there. But when you try to engage at a higher level, that's when you start to hit the roadblocks.
Maybe I'll add some light of hope. I would like to remind you that in 2007, Russian diplomats were expelled from London. Russia-UK relations were at the low level. But then things changed a little bit. Sandra, there is some probably noise coming from your microphone. So, but then they came 2008, and Britain was in a very severe financial and economic crisis. Well, the peak was in October 2008. And what did Gordon Brown do? He recalled Peter Mandelson from the European Commission and appointed him Secretary of State for Business. The first visit of Peter Mandelson abroad, what do you think it was? To Moscow. So when UK interests are at the fore, then London does whatever it needs to do in its own interests. So this is the pragmatism of which Alexei Gromyko did say. And well, watching the UK for some, I wouldn't say how many years, we know that when the UK needs cooperation of Russia, it hands out its desire to cooperate. I don't think that Brexit will bring much hope in this respect, but you never know how Brexit will turn for the UK, because the UK now and the EU inevitably will become, well, as we said here, rivals or competitors. So probably the UK will need Russia.
There is one glimmer in the recent Russia Sanctions Act that was passed in Westminster. And that would suggest, upon my reading, that any sanctions that are currently implemented at a European level, when it enters into force on the 1st of January, will be lowered compared to what they are now. So hopefully with a bit of pragmatism, as you say, that this will open up better business relations and with that will hopefully expand their cultural links as well.
Probably to extend cultural links is the easiest way, but now it is so politically loaded that I don't know how that will happen. Probably cooperation will happen in the field of economy, because since they have left the EU, then the quotas of the EU, between the EU and of Britain, between in trade between EU and Russia, and in trade between Britain and Russia, should be revised. So probably these talks will start. What I would like to say again is that British pragmatism probably will might lead to better relations, since economic relations went steadily up until 2014. They went down a little bit in 2008 just because of the crisis. But notwithstanding political difficulties, economic cooperation went on and on until 2014. And now, by the way, now Russian cooperation, Russian trade with the European Union and with the UK is steadily rising. This is all behind the scenes. And well, this is hidden, and laymen in Russia and in the UK well, really don't know about that. But there is this cooperation, security cooperation, as I said, during the World Cup in Russia, and this cooperation during the pandemic. Who could expect AstraZeneca and Russian solution?
May I come? Sorry.
Yes, please.
May I come in again on that point? It's very interesting for me the way in which Russia and China are being spoken of increasingly in a single breath. I don't think that's the way in which ordinary Brits necessarily think about it. When I was reading responses to a George Galloway tweet wherein he said, I can arrange for you a deal with Russia and China because no one likes Britain after Brexit. It was so interesting the number of people that said, Russia, yes, China, no. And that's ordinary people are making that distinction. Now, yes, of course, in the British elite, there's a huge amount of hostility to Russia, some of it perfectly irrational. It seems what happened following the breakdown of the Soviet Union is as Russia moved from being a Marxist to a socially conservative country, it lost all of its Marxist friends here in the UK and failed to gain any conservative ones. You know, look at someone like Glenn Deason as an isolated example of a conservative working in Western academia that's actively supportive of Russian positions on things. So I think that change that's happening is interesting. Why is it that Russia is positioning itself all the time as part of Russia and China? I'm not sure necessarily it helps Russia.
But you know, on the world stage, you have to have countries that you have mutual interests with. Is that Russia and China have mutual interests? That's all.
No, but Russia. It's Russia is a Russian power. It is a major global world power. I don't think, from the Russian perspective, I think there was a time, definitely in the 90s, where it seemed as though, you know, Russia was fading away from the world stage. Today, Russia can stand on its own 2 feet and should certainly and is certainly trying to make overtures to any countries that are working with it. So I think that the effect as well of Russian media is tends to be something accumulative. It gives a voice to voices in countries that are excluded from the mainstream. If you look at something like RT.com, for instance, it's very interesting. Now, ideologically, it's just a mishmash of all sorts of different opinions. But the one thing that a lot of the contributors have is they seem to be people that are excluded from the mainstream of conversation in their own countries. And so Russia, certainly around the world, has its friends and followers and supporters, people who are grateful at least to have been given some form of platform. So I do just worry about the effect of from a Russian perspective, you can imagine the effect of this too close connection with China. And on the economic front, it's pretty disastrous, it would seem, as well from Russia. If you look at the trade balances, Russia exporting raw natural goods to China and getting back finished products. So certainly you worry about that sort of relationship, certainly from a Russian perspective. But I'm just curious to hear what our Russian experts think about that.
Well, I'm not an expert in Russia-Chinese relations, but you have different fields of cooperation. Well, of course, there are voices here in Russia that China is a major economic power and Russia is not. Russia is a military power and China is not a military, well, a global military power yet. But we have mutual interests. And by the way, we have mutual interests with the UK in the Security Council. Yeah. For instance, on climate change, on Iran, we have the same views. So it is possible to be rivals or competitors in one field and to have mutual interest in another field. I'm terribly sorry. Maybe somebody, Alexei Gromyko or Ivan Popov, will help me. I can't speak.
Hello. Hello. Can I just say something based on what Peter Reed and David and Joe all said? And Joe said that what common interest do we have with Russia? And we talked about the Pacific, the Asia Pacific being the great forum for the future. And we talked about Russian-Chinese relations. One thing we haven't mentioned is the Northern Sea route. The route through the melting Arctic from the Pacific, which will bring goods from China to Western Europe via the what used to be called Britain, which is now going to be called the Northeast Atlantic Archipelago, in 2 weeks less time. I think that is a potential very important development, and I also think it's a very important potential area for contribution between Russia and the United Kingdom and Scotland and everybody else and China. Just a thought.
Thank you. Thank you for your valuable thought. Yes, this is a new development, and yesterday it was announced that a highway around Moscow has been built that would facilitate the transportation of goods from Western China to Europe. Okay, anybody else wants to comment? Well, probably we we've shared our ideas, and we leave this session with a lot to think about. And we will do a lot of research on the topics that have been mentioned in our, so to say, menu in our program. I would like to thank all of you, and I would like to thank the Gorchakov Fund for this session. I think that we should write some sort of a report on this meeting. So if you would like to share your views and ideas for this report, well, your endeavor will be most welcome. So thank you very much, and bye-bye to you all.
Thank you, Elena.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Thank you all.
Спасибо всем большое.
All the best. И с наступающим Новым годом, со скорым Новым годом.
Спасибо вам большое.
Thank you.
All the best.
Happy New Year when it comes. Bye-bye.
Happy New Year.
Bye.
Bye-bye.